MetaEthics, the biology of ethics. I was inspired to do these videos because Malay gave a talk on ethics, particularly ethics as it applies to governments. I have already done 2 videos on the dominant ethics pushed by the mainstream media and the global elite. That is altruism and utilitarianism. Links in the show notes. These 2 ethical philosophies are the ethical basis of socialism. Both of these ethical philosophies have a group or collectivist point of view about what is good and bad. In this video, I hope to break new ground by building on the works of Aristotle and Ayn Rand, which both took an individualistic point of view about what is good and bad in ethics. Ayn Rand, in describing her conception of ethics, starts with the biological point of view. She states, an organism's life depends on 2 factors, the material or fuel which it needs from the outside from its physical background, and the action of its own body, the action of using the fuel properly. What standards determine what is proper in this context? The standard is the organism's life, that which is required for the organism's survival. Note, she talks about an organism here. She isn't talking about man. She goes on to point out, if an organism fails in the basic functions required by its nature, it dies. Rand is building an ethics on biological reality here. And every organism, not just man, faces the ultimate choice, life or death. Of course, when we usually use the word ethics, we are thinking about volitional or conscious choices, which is why I entitled this video MetaEthics. As Rand states in her objectivist ethics, a plant has no choice of action. The goals it pursues are automatic, determined by its nature. In other words, determined by its DNA. I would only add, it has no volitional choice of action. It definitely has encoded choices that it makes, given a certain set of conditions. For instance, most plants grow toward the sun. Their DNA is set up in such a way so that the cells that are getting the most sun grow slower than the cells getting the least sun, so that the plant grows towards the sun. This is obviously a hard-coded choice that the plant makes in order to increase its chance of survival by getting more sunlight. That sounds a little bit like Aristotle and Rand's definition of ethics. As the cognitive ability of animals increases, they increase the number of choices that they can make that are not hard-coded in their DNA. This gives them the ability to adapt to new circumstances, whereas plants are hard-coded, so they have the same response no matter what the situation is. Interestingly, in plants, both the value and the choice are hard-coded. Thus, for instance, a plant values water. Its choice is to always grow its roots towards sources of water. These are hard-coded values and choices that do not allow the plant to adapt to a new situation. For example, a plant that is not used to growing in an arid region might grow towards the sun when it would be better off growing towards the shade. Or a tree might grow its roots towards a river, which might make it vulnerable to a flood situation. We can think of DNA as being like a hard-coded circuit as opposed to software, which allows it to be more flexible. For instance, crows are able to remember a human being that caused another crow harm, and they will purposely avoid that person. On the other hand, crows are able to recognize people that they consider helpful and good, and they actually make very good pets because they're very intelligent. Humans, unlike any other species, are essentially born tabula rasa. We have almost no innate values or choices. We do have the immediate ability to sense pleasure or pain, which allows us to know when we're being damaged and avoid that situation. We may feel the pain of hunger, that does not teach us how to hunt or how to make a bow and arrow. We can feel the elements, but that doesn't teach us how to build a shelter or necessarily even to seek shelter. This ability to choose our own values and how to achieve those values makes us unique and allows us to live in all sorts of climates around the world. However, this also has a dark side. It means that human beings can choose a self-destructive ethics, such as altruism or utilitarianism, or the absurdity of climate change/environmentalism, which believes that humans are evil. We are the only species that can choose the value that we think our own species is evil. If we look at every other organism other than human beings, they have to make their primary value in ethics their own life. If all the individuals in a species don't value their own life, then that species ceases to exist, i.e., it goes extinct. That's the metaethics for every living organism other than man. It means that all organisms value their own life above any other. You might think that there are animals that sacrifice their life to protect their babies. But in order to be useful as a parent to their babies, they have to stay alive. This is why the airline announcement commands that you put on your oxygen mask first before putting on your child's oxygen mask. Yes, there may be certain situations in which parents will appear to sacrifice their life to save their babies. That can't be a general rule, that they're giving up their life for their babies, or that species would cease to exist. Similarly, every organism has to value its own species above all others. In other words, it has to be a speciesist. If species A values species B above itself, then species A will go extinct. Also, from an evolutionary point of view, we tend to favor our own offspring. In other words, families. Because the whole idea in evolution is that you pass on your genes. Failure to pass on your own genes makes you an evolutionary failure. And if enough of the individuals in your species fail to pass on their own genes, then the species goes extinct. Thus, we see from a metaethics point of view, every organism values its life above all others, and it values its species above all others, and it probably values its family above other families. Now, there's a lot of content in the scientific community that there is a scientific or biological basis for altruism. These so-called scientists point to social insects like ants and bees. They claim that species like ants and bees often exhibit extreme altruism, with workers sacrificing their reproductive potential to care for the queen and her offspring. These so-called scientists either don't know the definition of altruism or they're just pushing a political point of view. Under the definition of altruism, you can't do anything that's in your self-interest. For example, if you give to a charity expecting that it will improve your community and therefore improve your life, they don't consider that good, they consider that evil. And it is in the interest of these worker ants and bees that the queen survive, or the whole hive dies. Another supposed example of altruism in the wild is that of the vervet monkeys. These primates engage in allomothers, where related females care for each other's young, demonstrating kin-directed altruism according to these scientists. Again, these so-called scientists either don't know the definition of altruism or they're pushing a political point of view. By definition, these monkeys are acting in their own self-interest by sharing their mothering responsibilities. This is something that humans also do. And in both cases, it's clearly in their self-interest. Altruism is an ethics of parasites. but it's a strange parasitic ethics, where the parasite is trying to live off of its own species. Thus, we can dispense with the nonsense of altruism being biologically grounded. In fact, biology shows that every species has to value itself above all other species, and every individual has to value itself above all other individuals. It would be impossible to encode/calculate the choices required to value the species above the individual, or valuing other species above your own. Long live freedom, damn it.